good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Bill Hodge. I'm the Executive Director of the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation and part of the core team for putting together the National Wilderness Skills Institute. But for the sake of this session, I am two things. I'm part of the cadre of instructors that will be putting on these 4 Crosscut Saw classroom courses. I will be your presenter tomorrow, but today you'll get to hear from the top of the food chain in the world of saws. The cadre that have been working on putting together these 4 sessions, obviously in a unique environment. Normally we would be in a classroom, but then also being able to hit the field pretty quickly, but we're going to be spending 4 sessions together. And if you're in this one, we're hoping you're planning on being in all 4 for sure, so that you'll be ready to actually go to a field certification part of the process. But besides myself, we also have Eric Sandino, who is with the Washington office in the Wilderness and Wild Scenic Rivers program as the information manager there. Jimmy Godrew was part of early on putting this together. He's the Wilderness and Wild Scenic Rivers program manager for the northern region here where I am. Today's instructor is Pete Duncan. Pete is the National SAW Program Manager from the Washington office, so actually not working out of Washington. And Dave Harwell, who is going to be teaching Thursday and Friday, joins us from Region 9. He's a pre-sale forester there on the Green Mountain National Forest. And Tisha Street is going to be with us all week, sort of making sure that Zoom functions okay and trying to answer questions. My role today as a moderator is hopefully to just get out of the way, but maybe tee up some questions for Pete as he goes through his presentation. With that, it is my distinct privilege to introduce Pete Duncan and let Pete get us started on our 4 days together.
Well, good morning or afternoon, depending where you are. As Bill said, my name is Pete Duncan. I am the National SAW Program Manager for the U.S. Forest Service. I work for Recreation, Heritage, and Volunteer Resources out of the Washington office. However, I'm located remotely on the Plumas National Forest in Northern California. I live in a little town called Quincy, California. I've been in this position for a little over 4 years now. Prior to that, I spent 30-something years working in fire, but have been involved nationally with the SAW program, since about 2010 or so. So a fair amount of experience there. I've been a C evaluator since 2000. Used to be the SAW program coordinator for Region 5, all of California, for a number of years. So today we're going to get into an introduction to crosscut saw operations. And today's objectives for this course are going to be, we're going to discuss the guiding documents for the SAW program. We're going to discuss the requirements needed to become a Sawyer. We're going to discuss the different levels of Sawyer certification. We're going to go over PPE requirements. We're going to discuss how human factors affect operations. We're going to discuss the components of the 5-step size-up process. And we're going to discuss operational complexity. And as Bill said, if at any time you have a question, use the hand function to raise your hand, and Bill or Tisha will catch that, and we can address your question right there. I don't mind pausing the presentation to answer questions, and then we'll have this presentation will take about an hour, a little bit more, and we'll have lots of time afterwards to address any of your questions. So why is this training important? Well, obviously it's for your safety and the safety of others around you, to protect infrastructure so that it doesn't get damaged. And of course, we want to protect the tools. Crosscut saws, they don't make them anymore. Most of them are well over 100 years old, fairly fragile. And without the proper techniques that you're going to learn this week, there's a high likelihood that they could be damaged. And then, of course, there's the efficiency factor. The better techniques that you use and the more you master them, the more enjoyable working out in the woods with the crosscut saw can be. So we'll just jump right into the guiding documents. Right off the bat, we have OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Agency, and they have a law which is called under 1910.266 Code of Federal Regulations, and it's called the logging standard. And so when you guys go out and you use a crosscut saw, bam, you become loggers. Our operations are under the jurisdiction of OSHA and that logging standard. And most of our training and policy and safety requirements all come from that logging standard. Then we have our policy, the Forest Service policy. So it falls under the Forest Service Manual 2358, and it is the National Saw Policy. I'm not going to go extensively into it today. There's a lot to it, and for the sake of what you're going to be doing, you just have to know that that is the policy that our rules and regulations fall under. So you want to become a sawyer, what do you need to be? Well, you have to be at least 16 years old. You would have had to completed a nationally recognized saw training course from an authorized instructor. You have to be first aid and CPR certified. You would have had to successfully complete a field evaluation. And after that field evaluation, that's when you get your National Sawyer certification card. And then it has to be signed by an authorized certifying official. What levels can you be certified at? Well, the first and most basic level is the A level. And you could be certified as an A level bucking only or an A level felling and bucking. And what A means is that you can limb and buck or limb buck and fall in the least complex situations. And we'll go into complexity further into this presentation. It's a complex, so to speak, situation to figure out what the complexity of your saw operation is going to be. The next level is at the B level, again, bucking only or felling and bucking. But what B means is that you can operate in a moderately complex situation. And then finally, we have the C level, and these sawyers can operate in the most complex situations. We have some other levels that have to do with evaluation and instruction, but we're not going to go into that today for the sake of this course.
Hey, Pete, we already got a question. I think it's a good one to go back to earlier in your presentation. Your line about that they don't make crosscuts anymore. What are we going to do when we eventually run out of usable vintage saws? There is still one company making, correct?
Correct, Curtis, but they aren't the best saws. Yeah. There is a gentleman in Oregon, David Rowe, who has been working over the last few years to perfect the metallurgy and the grind. And Dave on Thursday will go over what the different grinds mean, hollow ground versus straight ground. And so he's experimenting. He's trying to find companies and funding to produce some modern saws. So, but to answer your question, yeah, when they're gone right now, the good ones.
That's why we got to take care of them, because yeah, those Curtis saws don't hold an edge, and they're pretty damn heavy too.
Yeah. Thanks for that question. Okay. Personal protective equipment, or PPE. First off the bat, you have to protect your head, right? And so you have to wear a hard hat that meets the American National Standards Institute standard of Z89.1. So not all hard hats are created equal. And if you pick up a hard hat somewhere embossed in the plastic, will be this standard Z89.1, and that way you know it meets it. And so it's not just a hard hat style, a ball cap style hard hat. It could be, you know, there's lots of arborist helmets out there, or climbing helmets that all meet this standard. So as long as it meets that Z89.1 standard, you're good to go. Eye protection. So this is safety glasses. These are not your normal reading glasses or sunglasses. They, like a helmet, have to be imprinted with Z87.1, that standard. And that has to do with impact resistance and puncture resistance. Of course, with a crosscut saw, that's one of the great things about it. You don't need hearing protection. Hand protection. Wear a glove that is appropriate for the type of conditions you're working in and what makes you comfortable. You don't have to wear big, bulky leather gloves. There's lots of different styles of gloves out there, from the kind of fabric mechanic gloves to the nitrile gloves that you can get. You know, a great place to get pretty good gloves for not very expensive prices is Harbor Freight. They have a good selection of gloves, and just find a pair that fits you and that you're comfortable with. A long sleeve shirt it's not required, it's recommended, but it can be optional based on your conversation with your supervisor or the person supervising the project you're working on, and their job hazard analysis. Long pants are needed, just well-fitting ones. You don't want them too loose, you don't want them too tight. You're moving a lot when you're using a crosscut saw, so you want to be able to move.
Quick question, Pete, on this topic from John. Are there brands, colors, types, etc., that are standard for the Forest Service, or specifically Region 5?
Referring to gloves or pants, shirt?
John, I'm gonna pop that answer in there in the Q&A box. You can keep going, Pete. And
Okay.
Oh, everything. He says everything. So
yeah, no, they're for trail work. This is all non-fire specific to crosscuts. There is no color, brand, anything like that. We do recommend a high vis shirt or vest to be worn, especially in felling situations. But just working on the trail, if you're bucking logs and somebody who's not associated with your operation walks up, you want to identify yourself as somebody who's there working. And high vis vests are inexpensive, or a brightly colored shirt really goes a long way, just to add that visibility, and you know where everybody on your crew is. So of course, chaps are not recommended or required. It's kind of hard to cut yourself really badly with a crosscut saw on your legs. I mean, you can drop the saw on your leg and it'll punch through your jeans and it'll hurt, but you're not going to get a cut similar to as you would with a crosscut or a chainsaw. So no leg protection is required. Footwear, just wear well-fitting boots that provide good ankle support and have non-skid soles. So I know we have a lot of folks that ride horses, and cowboy boots really aren't the best footwear when you're running a crosscut saw. So you slip around a lot. The other thing that's required is a first aid kit, and that first aid kit has to meet this standard that's in the logging standard. And so this is the minimum requirements. Most good first aid kits or trauma kits, wilderness first aid kits have all this equipment in them, or you can put your own together. And the first aid kit has to be commensurate with the number of people that are out there. So, you know, if you have 10 people out there, maybe you have to have 2 or 3 first aid kits in case you have a mass trauma event or something like that. Okay, human factors. Our new training program, the Forest Service has, for the last 5 years, has been developing an all new Sawyer training program, and a lot of it focuses on human factors. So what are human factors? Human factors are actions taken by the sawyer which affect the outcome of the operation. Okay, it's basically how you think. And human factors, you have to understand your thoughts and how they apply to your environment to keep you out of trouble. So bottom line is that when a sawyer is more self-aware and they can better monitor and understand their thoughts and actions, resulting in decisions that are not driven by personal impulses, lessening at-risk decision, which lessens at-risk decision-making. So we recognized early on as we were developing our training that this was an important concept, and we teamed up with a group that actually specializes in human factors and with sawyers. They came out of British Columbia when the British Columbia logging industry was experiencing a high level of accidents and fatalities. And when this group called Switchback came in, took them a number of years, but they actually lowered the accident and fatality rate. So we teamed up with them, and they've helped us better understand human factors, and we've even put together some videos. So we'll show this first video. It's about 12 minutes long or so. We'll go through some questions at the end, and then there's a second part to this. So about the next 20 minutes or so, we'll watch these human factors videos, and then I'm sure there'll be some questions, and we'll try to answer them. So here we go.
My name's Adam Washabeck. I'm a wilderness ranger on the Bitterroot National Forest out of Stevensville Ranger District. I do a lot of trail work. I'm a packer, a blaster, a rigger. I teach a lot of crosscut saw, a lot of axemanship, and these days a little bit of chainsaw work as well. But trail work dictates my job. My motivation for teaching a lot of this is we can become fantastic with a little bit more education and that thought that goes into a sawyer's mental toolbox. They have a lot of physical abilities already, but it's looking at the entire situation and thinking, how can I do this, and what will make it the easiest, simplest, and safest way.
No matter what you're doing out there, whether you're limbing, bucking, or any task, no matter how simple, you need to think. You need to pay attention to what's going on in your physical environment, and you need to pay attention to what's going on in your brain. Follow the saw techniques we're going to give you, but they're not any good if you're not thinking. We can teach you anything in the world about saw operations, but if you're not paying attention, if you're not thinking, this is where you get hurt. And this is no place to get hurt. In the next couple of videos, we want to introduce you to some concepts that we, your peers, have been using for the past couple years. While these concepts are not new, we found that the way these folks at Switchback present them, they make a lot of sense. Give them a try, and after trying them, I think you'll realize they work.
My name is Stephen Falk, and I'm the founder of Switchback. So, what is Switchback and why do you care? Well, Switchback actually was started by industry to help sawyers like yourselves become safer and more mentally tough. Switchback has helped reduce fatalities with sawyers. So, how do we do that? Believe it or not, we do it by helping people understand their thoughts, because it all starts there. So maybe you're sitting in the back row and saying, hey, I'm mentally tough already. Here it is. This is how we define mental toughness. One is being able to understand your thoughts. It's massive. Number two, to be able to manage your memories. Some of you may not want to be doing that, but it's key. Number three is knowing when you're in team or out of team. Mental toughness requires that we all become aware of and monitor our thoughts, understand how memories can put us at risk, learn to manage our memories and our thinking, understand and work in team. In this first module, we'll introduce some of the ways to become aware of your thoughts and what it means to be in team. In module 2, we'll talk about how to manage these. Here's the first tool and concepts, the Switchback brain. We divide the brain into two areas, very simply, the front of the brain and the back of the brain. So let's talk about the front of the brain. The front of the brain was all your rational, wise, mature, life experience lives, and where you can access that in pretty full capacity. So obviously, if you're in the front of your brain, you're going to deliver the best product at a consistent level, even under pressure. Now, if it was that simple, that would be great. It's more complex than that. The front of the brain we put onto a continuum. We say on one side of the continuum is your thoughts are too passive, so you're not engaged enough, you're not owning the moment. And passive people have to monitor themselves in order to engage. On the other side of the continuum is you're too aggressive. Now you're too hot. And now your thoughts are like clouded by ego and like, who needs a team? And aggressive people have to monitor themselves to make sure they're not overstepping. And so even when you're in that rational part of your brain where it's like you're clicking on all cylinders and you actually are accessing memories that are going to make you very successful, still there's a level of discernment that's necessary. Am I too passive? Am I too aggressive? Am I in the zone? So that's the front of the brain. The front of the brain is like a valley floor. Up above are two mountains, the flight side and the fight side. So you're running your saw, you're under pressure, it's all good. That's good stress, good adrenaline. But then something happens, either subconsciously, unconsciously, or something actually happens in your physical world that creates an upset. What happens then is you actually start getting chatter from the back of your brain. So your front of the brain is trying to focus on the task at hand. The back of the brain starts going, hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? We call that switchbacking, and you switch the flight to the fight, to the flight, to the fight. When you ping in the back of your brain, adrenaline starts flowing, and with it, increased heart rate, increased reactivity, decreased awareness, and the ability to take in additional information. As a consequence, decreased quality of decision making. This is a massive issue for anyone that's ever run a saw. This is a massive issue for anyone that's tried to be in a relationship. This is a massive issue if you've ever tried to raise a kid. So this is a universal issue. It's just huge for sawyers because you have to manage this on the fly. We were filming Todd cut down some trees. It became a perfect example of what happens when you're out here working.
Well, I was trying to get these trees to do a certain thing and go a certain way, and it wasn't happening. And I had several tries doing it and couldn't get them to do what I wanted them to do. I was getting really frustrated and embarrassed. Just that frustration is something you got to manage it. You're already in this state of mind where you you can't get that the next tree to go better. And then you're just spiraling. You're just, oh, and I'll just cut one more. The next one will go better. I'll redeem myself on the next one.
Yeah.
And you're just going down.
So it'd be awesome if you could just live in the front of your brain in that middle zone, but it's not realistic. Sometimes the circumstances you're in pushes you out of that zone and into passivity. So mental toughness means you have to recognize that and push it back in. So let's say you're running your saw, the saw pinches. It happens all the time. But when the saw pinches, for most of us, we get this adrenaline rush that says, holy, now I'm in upset condition. So it's the flight-fight response. What's the first thing you're gonna do? It is. You're gonna look and say, did anybody see me do it? Is that fight or flight? That's the fight response. And then what's the second thing you're gonna do? You're gonna pull in that saw like you've never pulled before.
That's the fight response.
It doesn't make any rational sense because the rational part of your brain goes, hey Steve, forget it. This thing is pinched. But the irrational part of your brain goes, Steve, you just screwed up. Everyone saw it. Sometimes you're too hot, you're too full of ego, you're too full of pride, you get too excited. You need to actually calm yourself down, recognize it, think about your thoughts, and move back into team. This dynamic is all over our lives. But when you flash up a saw, this dynamic is the difference between success and potential catastrophic failure. I want to give you one more switchback diagram in this module. So it's called the 4 quadrants. It's just a basic square, real simple. So going up this side here is all the rules and regs in the system. So high in the top, low in the bottom. Going along the bottom side is relationships and team and communication. So low on this side, high on this side. Then we just number them. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let me describe these different quadrants. So if you're in high quadrant 1, it means that you're a rule keeper. You love the rules, you love the system, your saw is perfectly polished and all the rest. But being in 1 means that you're like, stuff first, people last, which means you're not a team player. You know right away how that's a liability. You can actually recognize yourself in that, and you can recognize others. Quadrant 4 on the other side is, man, you're sure fun to be with, but your saw is not maintained, your plan isn't very well executed, and you're kind of reckless. 3, on the other hand, is a depletion of both of those lines. And so you're not organized, and you're also not friendly. That's just pain and chaos. So of course, where's the spot? Where's the target for your brain? Where's the target for the people you work with? It's gotta be quadrant 2. So we just draw a big circle around there and say, that's what you're shooting for, quadrant 2. So in the saw world, it's simple. We're asking you to plot yourself and develop the capacity to become expert technicians and expert communicators at the same time. Here it is. Most of us don't get quadrant 2 for free. And most of us can't maintain quadrant 2 all the time. So question from me to you is, when you're not in 2, where are you? Do you become this rule-orientated person? Do you become a, hey, let's just joke around and goof around and cut some corners? Do you become the, let's just go drink? Where do you go? And how quickly can you recognize yourself leaving 2? And how quickly can you get back to 2? That's the game change. Switchback defines team as people that are being mentally tough, they're committed to each other, and they actually have a bit of capacity to actually know each other. Like, if you develop a level of trust with each other, we think that's one of the ingredients to building a world-class team of sawyers.
And I would also say that it's important for our work because it's necessary to be able to read each other, especially in some of the safety situations. So if you're looking at someone, you can tell they're uncomfortable with a cut they're making. You need to have that background story to be able to read each other.
And the ability, like, trust and care about each other is just the basis for open communication.
And we see safety scenarios in different ways. Some of us think that one situation might be more dangerous than someone else does, but it kind of varies person to person, or we see different things. So it's important. I think that we do a good job of talking to each other about when we see things like that. but we're all not going to see the same thing. The
And it
important part
might-
is communicating.
Yeah. And it might be a space where perhaps I don't see something and even though I am more active, whereas Amelia, who can tend to be a little more passive, at that point steps up and is a little more active. So
I think it's interesting also to watch that variation within person too. So you can notice like when Amelia's more tired, she'll be more like, all right, we really need to look at this and slow down and take that time too. So individual variation is important to recognize as well.
Yeah, we call that team.
Team can also be defined as being in the sweet spot, in the front of your own brain.
The first time I ever drew that switchback diagram with the mountains and that valley was at an investigation after a sawyer like yourself ended his career by having a big snag come down on top of him, pinched a saw in the back cut. But you know what happened next? He switched to the back of his brain. So he was in the zone, but that adrenaline dump that happened when he pinched his saw sent him into the fight response. And he went to flight, to fight, to flight, to fight. And he made a series of decisions that were irrational, which ended his career. There was a sawyer that had almost identical situation, same kind of snag. He does the undercut, but because he's tuned in and he's in what we call team, when he went to go to do the back cut, he just stopped. And his brain started giving him clues, like warning clues. So he popped his muffs, shut off a saw, and literally backed up like 10 steps, put a saw down, stood back another about 15 steps, and he just waited and he watched. That man was in team at that moment, from our definition. You know what happened next? That tree came down. That's what it means to be in team. So here's the challenge. Get yourself into the front of the brain. Recognize when you're switchbacking in the flight and fight. Make a commitment to being in quadrant 2 and start to really understand your thinking.
And next module, we'll talk more specifically about managing memories and how to recover.
Okay, so we got lots of people in there. If you want to pop an answer into the chat, that'd be great. Bill, maybe you can read some of them off, but think about when are you in the front of your brain? What does that mean? I'll give you guys a couple minutes.
So Huey says when things are going according to plan.
Yeah.
And that's the easiest way to stay in front of your brain for sure. In the moment and in the team, says Chaco. When you're engaged in the task at hand, keeping awareness around you of what's going on. You're performing at the best of your abilities and able to make good rational decisions, good situational awareness, pausing to assess the change in the situation. When you've taken the entire picture, I like that one. Firing on all cylinders. I like this too from Scotty, operating within the zone and aware of your space and team.
Yeah, and we'll learn more during the rest of the week about how important it is to be in team, especially when you're running a crosscut saw. So what happens when you leave that sweet spot of your brain?
Poor decision-making from Carla. Thoughts become scattered and racing. Lack of control of the situation. Mistakes happen because you make rash decisions. You're reactive versus being proactive. That's when injuries happen. I think, Pete, everybody's paying attention. That's what I'm taking from this chat box.
Yeah, it's great. I like the way Stephen puts it, that you're irrational. You're not thinking about what you're doing. You're reacting to a situation rather than thinking your way through it. So this next video will discuss what do you do when you recognize that you've left your sweet spot and you're becoming irrational, you're starting to switch back, how do you recover out of that?
She's going! Hi, Stephen Falk here again.
In a minute, we're going to talk about what to do when you find yourself pinging around in the back of your brain, or otherwise on a team. Before that though, let's refresh. In the last module, we said that mental toughness requires that we all become aware of and monitor our thoughts, understand how memories can put us at risk, learn to manage our memories and our thinking, understand and work in team. And the two tools, the brain diagram and the 4 quadrants, help us become aware of our thoughts and to understand what it means to work in team. Now we want to introduce a couple of other concepts and tools to help you learn how to manage and recover.
We're trying to give you tools so that you can build capacity rather than becoming reactive and potentially putting yourself or others in harm. Instead, you can become mentally tough, focused, and become a real asset to yourself, to the people around you, and it can spill off into your personal life also.
So here's the first tool. It's called Memory X, and it helps us understand our memories and how to work in them. See, the question is,
why do people switch back? Like, why do they, when the adrenaline hits, why do they go to the flight-fight response? Well, there's healthy fight-fight, but then there's unhealthy. So we're talking about the unhealthy one.
the healthy response is what keeps us safe when there's actual danger. Unfortunately, our brains cannot distinguish between perceived and actual danger, current and historic danger. Many things can trigger an out of proportion response. It all comes down to this.
They go there because of stored memories. So the brain experts tell us today that all stimulus is stored. That means that everything that you have experienced up until this date is stored in your brain.
Every moment is stored, and the memory that is relatively traumatic is stored in the back of the brain as an X. The memories that are useful for day-to-day success are stored in the front. The back of the brain, we say, is triggered by adrenaline or by history or by habit. So there's lots of different reasons why people go to the back of the brain. First, the flight side, and then if you don't want to live there, then you go to the fight. When you try to do something on the fight side, whatever it is that you're trying to do usually fails. Here's how it works.
You pinch your saw, you get the adrenaline rush, you bump into the flight side,
And you're likely to activate a memory X. What happens when you hit a memory X? You get even more of an adrenaline dump. Now the flight-fight response is ramping up your reactivity even further.
and now one of your next decisions is going to be now influenced by that memory. React, and you go to the fight response, and you fail. So now you go further up the mountain. Surprise, surprise, you hit another memory X. So here's something to consider. You can't not store this stuff. It's a question, where are you going to store these X's? Historically, in the past, people said, just bury it. Bury this thing and never talk about it. What we need to do is we need to start processing those X's. Let the front of your brain start moving those X's down and talk about them. It's as simple as that. If you start talking about X's, they start normalizing. Whatever it is, the front of your brain has the capacity to sort out that complexity and start moving these X's like as a regular part of your day. You get the adrenaline rush. Now what are you going to do? You have to stop and think. Not just about the technical aspects of the cutting process. You have to stop and think and say, where am I? Have I left quadrant 2? Have I left the front of my brain right in the dead center? And if I have, the interesting part is, I wonder what X I hit. And if you're willing to stop and in the next day or two ponder this and talk to one of your friends, you can actually really develop a level of capacity to manage stress and live under pressure that you probably didn't think was possible.
Here's the primary key to managing your thinking and recovering. Stop breathe, rethink, replan. And the more you stop and think, the more it becomes natural. When it becomes natural and you get a handle on this, it's a simple model, but it has a profound possible impact for your life as a sawyer. So stop and think, where am I? Am I in the front of the brain? If you can sense that you're out, you obviously have left quadrant 2, that's one piece. The other piece is you've either gone passive aggressive, the back of the brain to the flight or the fight. Just the other day, 3 of us were watching one of our buddies cut up a tree that refused to cooperate. What we noticed was how completely our buddy, an experienced sawyer, seemed to tunnel vision. We tried to get his attention, but it was as if he was in his own, quote, adrenaline bubble. Finally, we got his attention by shouting, "Stop!" Make a commitment to be willing and able to stop. Pause, pull back, and take another look when you find yourself caught in the adrenaline bubble. Breathe. Before you jump into problem solving or shaking your fist at the sky or yelling at your supervisor, breathe. Research tells us that deliberate, slow, deep belly breathing in and out for at least a minute will slow your heart rate, reduce the chemical hormone dump in your brain, and it allows you to get out of the back of your brain and into the front of your brain. With attention to breathing helping you re-engage the front of your brain, you can then more effectively process, reframe, and plan and execute. This involves thinking about your thoughts so you can put them in order and perspective. Rethink. Has my objective changed? Talk it through with someone. Replan. Develop a new plan to address the changed situation.
So we're going to take a little minute here. So think about that question. How do you spool down? How do you recover when you find yourself pinging around in the back of your brain? What have you found that helps you recover? We'll give you guys a few minutes to put some things in the chat.
I take a hydration break is what I do. You seeing these, Peter? Do you want me to share?
No,
them?
I'm not seeing them, Bill.
Okay. Similar to what I said, somebody says grab a bite to eat, discuss it with my peers, stop, breathe, rethink, replan. I like that. Not all cut plans go according to plan and require creating a whole new cut plan. Step back and breathe, reevaluate, ditto on the hydration, taking time to think or talk about another topic, focus on breathing, thinking about concepts like slow is fast. Slow everyone down and shifts the energy. I stop and walk away for a new perspective. Step back and breathe. Ground myself, and I like this, ground myself in sensory experiences nearby. Watch the clouds, bird watch, whatever. Visualize what compose looks like, what right looks like.
Great. Really good responses. I like those thoughts a lot.
Yeah.
So we'll continue on here.
Let's go back to the story. Remember our buddy caught in his adrenaline bubble? What happened next is interesting. We eventually convinced the sawyer to shut off the saw and put it down. We talked with him, and as we did, I watched his breathing pattern. It went from shallow and rapid to steady and deep. After a couple of minutes, you could see a change in his demeanor. His eyes returned to friendly, his body relaxed, and he naturally regained his commitment to himself and us. We as a group team came up together with a new plan to deal with the developing complexity. As soon as you recognize yourself in the back of your brain, stop.
Stop and think and step back and just look at what are my options and what am I trying to do, And ultimately, do I need to do this, or can someone else with something else make the same task happen?
And we don't care if you're a volunteer, if you're a brand new on a saw, if you're an old saw dog. We don't care if you're male, female. If you're picking up a saw, holy cow. Develop the discipline to be able to stop and think. So
I mean, nobody's perfect though.
So the point is, we're not looking for perfection. What we're looking for is a quick chance to recognize what's going on, having the mental toughness or commitment to recover soon. Like quickly. Sometimes one breath, stop. Sometimes just an attitude check. Sometimes let her sit on a stump for an hour, after dinner, and then maybe in the morning, maybe she'll merge back into team again.
But it also, I think, takes accountability or self-accountability. So noticing when you're perhaps speaking to someone in a manner that's like, wow, and noticing that that's not your comfortable place, and it is, maybe you're dehydrated, maybe you're feeling agitated from something that just spooked you a little bit or whatever it be, and being aware enough to try to mitigate that yourself.
So let's go back to the top. To be high-performing sawyers, you have to be good externally with the saw and environment. You also have to be good internally with your mind. This means becoming aware of your thoughts, work in team, which means being in quadrant 2 and in the sweet spot in the front of your brain. Understand and begin to work with your memories, which is the concept of memory X's. Learn to manage these, which means being mentally tough. Notice when you're out of team. Be able to stop, think, talk to others, manage yourself, down-regulate, and be able to engage the wise, mature part of your rational brain.
Okay, before we go into OHLEC, any final thoughts on human factors or questions?
Looks like we're good, Pete.
Okay, good. All right, we'll move on here. So we're going to start going into size up. And so for size up, we've come up with the mnemonic of OHLEC or OHLEC. And what it is it's a 5-step size up process. The O stands for objective. The H stands for hazards. The L stands for leans if you're falling, or binds if you're bucking. E is escape plan. And C is the cut plan. And we'll go into these more in depth. And what this 5-step process ultimately allows you to do is to identify the complexity of the sawing operation. So O, first step, and we always do these in order. We have to determine the objective, or more simply put, where do you want the piece of wood to end up? Where do you want the tree to fall, or where do you want that section of bucked log to end up when it's cut free? So hazard, H is hazards. So you need to identify the hazards that are present. And I should go back to objective. Once you've determined your objective, all the other steps, H, L, E, and C, are all in relation to achieving that objective. So when we look at hazards, you know, the woods, when you're out in the woods, there's hazards everywhere. You can have overhead hazards, you can have hazards on the ground. The weather could be a hazard. You yourself, if you're not in team, could be a hazard. So you need to identify the hazards that are relative to you accomplishing your objective. Probably the most important thing to look out for are overhead hazards. What's gonna come down on top of you? And if you come up with some hazards that are present and you can't mitigate any of them, you're gonna have to change your objective. So leans and or binds. So if you're following a tree, you need to determine the front to back lean and the side to side leans. And that goes in later when you formulate your cut plan. When you're bucking or limbing, you need to determine the kind and location of the binds, whether it's a compressive bind or a tension bind. We'll go into more of this in detail tomorrow with Bill, but just remember this as you think about this tonight. Compression, probably the worst thing that can happen to you with a compression bind, if you don't read it right, is you get your saw stuck. It pinches your saw. Tension, on the other hand, can hurt you. So if you remember that you need to recognize where the tension is, most importantly, so you don't get hurt. There can be side bind, there can be multiple binds in one log, and they all change as you progress with your cuts. E is an escape plan. This is probably the most important component. You need to develop an escape plan that is purposeful and resilient enough so that you are in a safe area when the log or tree releases. And what do we need by resilient? Well, lots of unexpected things happen out there. And so when your plan doesn't go as expected, you should have an alternate escape plan in place that you can implement. When you're bucking, definitely stay on the uphill side, and for sure identify the reactive forces from either side binds or pivot points. Where is that log going to move to once you finish your cut? Best case scenario is that you can use a large solid tree or a rock for protection from anything that moves. It's always a good idea to prepare 2 escape routes in case, you have a contingency in case things don't go as planned, or we find ourselves, we want to finish on one side of the tree or log and we find ourselves on the other for whatever reason. Whoops. We want to practice using the escape paths. Got to make sure they're clear. There's nothing worse than having to utilize that escape path and then tripping and finding yourself on the ground and a log moving towards you. Some other things to remember: you really need an escape path when things go bad, right? That's when you need them. If everything goes good, you probably don't need an escape path. We all make mistakes, and that's okay. Just make sure you develop a plan that can accommodate mistakes. A really good example of this is following a back-leaning tree. If something happens, your primary escape route, of course, is going to be 45 degrees away from the fall of that tree. But if the tree's coming over backwards, if you lose it, you may have to go into the primary lay. That's your alternate. So just make sure you think about the what ifs. Once the tree or log releases, time is compressed. Things happen very quickly. So you need to have a good plan. And then also remember that once that tree or log releases, you as a sawyer have no control over it, and you can only react to the situation as that log or tree moves. So once you've assessed all that, the hazards and the leans or the binds, and kind of predetermined your escape plan. Now you need to put together your cut plan. And so when you're putting together your cut plan, you're going to determine your cutting sequence. Where are you going to start your cuts? And where are you going to finish them? Are you going to underbuck a log? Or are you going to cut it from the top down? What kind of, if you're falling a tree, what kind of undercut and what kind of back cut are you going to utilize? You're going to determine if there's a need for wedges and where you're going to place them and in what sequence are you going to place them. Those all come into putting together your cut plan. And lastly, you want to confirm your escape plan. It works based on the cut plan that you come up with. So now you've come up with your cut plan. Your final step is to determine the complexity of the operation. So what is complexity? We talked about this early on. So complexity is a characterization of the factors needing to be managed to complete the cutting operation. So how do you manage the hazards? How do you manage the leans or the binds? How do you manage your escape plan that you've put together? And how do you manage this plan that you put together to cut? So complexity it's rooted in experience. Everybody has different experience levels. What may be a complex situation for one person may not be a complex situation for another person based on their experience. Complexity is personal. You know, some people are okay with taking on a level of risk that other people may not be. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but you have to be aware that you're doing that. And one of the final things you have to do is do an honest gut check, honest assessment of what is your knowledge, skill, and qualification level for completing this cutting operation. So the cut plan determines the ultimate complexity of the operation. Can you put it all together to manage all the different aspects that you've identified? So if you notice here in these top boxes, that's OHLEC up there. We have objective, we have hazards, we have leans and binds, we have escape plan, and we have cut plan. Those all go into formulating complexity. And then this is where the honest assessment comes in. If you don't think you can do it, and remember, hope is not a plan. Don't think I think I can do this. You need to know pretty sure that you can pull off this cutting operation. If you can, then you go ahead with it. If you can't, you need to go back and re-look at your objective and change your objective and see how that affects all these other factors. If you can't change your objective, then you probably need to walk away from that cutting operation, or you need to consult somebody with some more experience. So your final question, should I cut this or not? That's your gut feeling. No one can tell you whether you can do it or not except for yourself. At this point, the Sawyer is the one in charge of the operation. So we put together this kind of simple chart to kind of quantify what goes into complexity based on OHLEC. So, and you can have a mixture of these things. You know, you could have an easily accomplished objective, but you might have some hazards that are present, more than one. You may require some wedging, but you have a clear escape path. And so you can have this mixture. So you're somewhere in here between low and moderate. It's your gut feeling. Is it more on the low side or is it more on the moderate side? And that's where you have to think about what your knowledge and skill and qualification level are. If you start running into everything lining up under one column, especially as you get more over here into the red, you have an objective that's going to be difficult to accomplish. Maybe you have a bathroom that you don't want to hit, or a fence line. There's lots of overhead hazards. It's a snag. There's some side lean involved. You only have one escape path, and you're going to have to do a boring back cut or a quarter cut with some stabilizing wedges. You're getting into a pretty complex situation, and so that you know, we could call out all the specific hazards and things like that, but there's just too many, and there's too many variables. So what we found is it just an honest assessment of looking at these columns and seeing where you think you land. And Bill, with that, we're going to go into a summary, and that'll be at the end of this, and we'll have some questions. So again, PPE, make sure that you have ANSI approved a hard hat and ANSI approved safety glasses. Make sure that you have appropriate gloves and appropriate shirt and pants for your situation. You know, if you're down in the southern United States in the summer in Mississippi, maybe it's not appropriate to wear a long sleeve shirt. Maybe a short sleeve shirt is just fine if you're not going to get scratches or cuts when you're out in the woods. Make sure you have proper footwear for this where you're working. Good ankle support and non-skid soles. Think a lot about human factors, and always strive for being in that quadrant 2, and for being in team. Recognize when you've left quadrant 2 and think about ways that help you can get back into quadrant 2, whether it's stopping for a water break or gazing at the clouds, or just sitting and talking to a more experienced sawyer, redeveloping your plan. That's the one thing that's going to keep you safe. We'll revisit OHLEC on Friday. This is your size up process that leads you ultimately to the complexity of the operation. So to recap, O is objective, H are hazards, L are leans and or binds if you're bucking, E is escape plan, which includes a cleared escape path, and C is the cutting plan. And we try to do these in a sequential fashion, but what you'll find yourself doing is you're running all these things after you've determined your objective. You're running HLEC through your head kind of concurrently. But make sure that you recognize each one of those components. Operational complexity and tying it all together. Again, complexity is personal. It's based on experience. It's based on mostly about where you are in your head. I always tell people that when I'm doing an evaluation, that besides getting your driver's license, your sawing evaluation is really the only operational test that you're going to get within what we do in the Forest Service. And you can either be on that day or off that day. I've seen many people who I know were very good sawyers. I'd worked with them in the months leading up to their evaluation, and for whatever reason, the day of their evaluation, they weren't in team with themselves. They could not put things together. And, so we couldn't certify them at the level they wanted to be at. So again, it's if you're not feeling it that day, just put the saw down and let somebody else run the saw. It happens to everybody. With that, we'll open it up for questions.
So Pete, this has been asked a couple times because I think people maybe haven't caught up with the slight change in policy. The footwear requirement is above the ankle. It is no longer the 8-inch, basically fire boots with slip resistant soles. Is there a requirement that those above the ankle boots be all leather? Or is it just that you have good ankle support and lug soles?
Yes, for crosscuts, it's just good ankle support and lug soles. And we have, we're in the process of amending policy. We hope to have the new policy published in the next few weeks. It's going through final review right now.
Matt, Matt asked a question about how you take care of the crosscut saw. Dave is going to cover that pretty in depth on Thursday and Friday, part of Friday, even up to and including a little bit of a précis on how to sharpen your saw, but certainly how to care for your saw in the field, how to transport the saw. So we will be covering that later in the week for sure. So Nick got a lot out of the human factors piece and how it's important to be working in team. It's great. Check the people putting. Andrew asked how trees are chosen to be cut down. And I'm gonna assume maybe in this case you're talking about our work in wilderness as opposed to obviously timber management. So Pete, you want to tackle that? Why we might be or how we choose the trees we do cut down?
So again, that's based on the needs of that particular site. If it's a designated campground in a wilderness and there's a lot of bug kill that threatens the safety of the visitors, those wilderness management managers can go through the agency process to allow those trees to be felled and for public safety. If a tree is threatening a trail and the trail can't be relocated, then due to public safety, those trees can be felled. Any tree that comes across the trail tread, of course, would be bucked out of the way to allow for safe passage, folks. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, hazard trees generally, Andrew, is what we're dealing with in wilderness, particularly at an admin site or in the rare case in a wilderness where we do have designated campsites like Pete referenced. And occasionally we will drop trees for material to build crib walls, that sort of thing.
Yeah, bridges or things like that.
Yeah, things like that. Lee, your question, is there a test at the end? There's not a test as it relates to this course, but there will be a test when you do go to your field certification at your local unit there in Virginia on the GWGF in terms of being able to demonstrate the skills, but you'll also get additional instruction in that field going portion. So those of you who are in this course, we are going to find a way to be able to communicate with your local unit that you've taken the classroom portion, but you will still be required to get certified by an accredited and certified instructor by your local unit in the case of the Forest Service. And they'll put you through the field portion of this, including putting some of the stuff that will be demonstrated over the next couple of days into actual action. Tomorrow is going to be interesting how to talk about binds and compression and tension using a pool noodle. A little heads up for you how tomorrow might go, but you will have to pass the test when it comes to demonstrating your ability to understand OHLEC, how to set up your cut plan, and actually the use of the tools, not just the saw, but an axe as well.
Yeah, our new training course that we are developing, it has a both a classroom and a field portion, more heavily weighted to the field portion where instructors demonstrate what was taught in the classroom, and then the students have a chance to put it into actual use. We have separated the evaluation portion from the training portion, knowing that it's maybe better to give folks a few days or weeks to actually practice their new skills before they get tested on it.
Pete, Jenny asked, are hard hats always required or only when trees are to be cut overhead? For example, if you're bucking trees that are on the ground, are hard hats required?
Yes, hard hats are always required. That's a separate Forest Service policy, which says anytime you're out in the field, you will have a hard hat on.
Rachel wants to know if those switchback videos are available publicly, and will they be incorporated more regularly as part of the nationally recognized SAW program?
So they are part of the new training curricula that we have put together. They will be part of that. They are not available publicly at this time. If you want to learn more about switchback, and this is by no means a we don't get any kickbacks for this, but if you do a Google search for switchback, they'll come up, and they have a lot of really cool stuff on their website that you can learn more about.
Great. Grady has a question I think I can answer here, which is some folks are watching this with a group of people, and they want to make sure everybody will get credit for having been through this classroom portion. Yeah, Grady, we'll need to make sure that we have everybody's name and email. And so if you didn't register them through the Skills Institute, just registered one time for one person, probably the best thing you can do is, and this would be to anybody who, if you think you have somebody who is going to sit through, and it is required that they sit through all 4 days, that if they sit through this, that they're not going to show up on the list that we currently have of those who registered, then email me, and I will put my email in the chat right now. And we will make sure we get out a letter saying that they've completed this this classroom portion. John's got a question. How do we get a trainer on our local forest? Region 5, from what they've heard, it's very limited available access to crosscut trainers. Obviously, that has been a effort we've been fighting for a long time. But Pete, what are your thoughts on how we have more crosscut certified Sawyers to teach these classes?
Yeah, so especially in Region 5, it is a challenge right now. They lost a few of their key instructors and evaluators to either movement to other agencies or through retirements. We are working on ways to get additional trainers out there, even if we have to bring them in from outside Region 5. The best bet for that individual would be to contact Mitch Hawkinson, who's this Region 5 SAW program coordinator, and he can give you some updates on the training. Additionally, larger groups, I don't know whether you're part of the larger groups like Pacific Crest Trail Association, they put on trainings. I don't know specifically when they're planning on putting on their next crosscut training, but they sometime in the spring usually put on some sort of SAW trainings. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for all the great questions.